Okay, welcome. Today we're jumping straight into Deuteronomy chapter 2.
That's right, a really pivotal chapter.
We're picking things up after, well, a long detour. The Israelites turned back towards the desert, the Red Sea route, just as they were told. And they spent a lot of time around the hill country of Seir.
A long time. The text really stresses that circling of Seir. It wasn't just passing through, more like, well, like you said, a detour,
Yeah,
a holding pattern.
uh-huh. And then after all that time circling, there's this sharp turn, a new instruction from God.
Yes, exactly. The command comes, you've been around this hill country long enough, now turn north.
Right. So, end of the wandering in circles, beginning of a new phase, and this brings them into contact with, well, several different groups.
It does. And the instructions for how to deal with each group are quite specific, starting with Esau's descendants, the people living in Seir.
Yeah, what's the rule for them? It's pretty careful, isn't it?
Extremely careful, almost surprisingly so. As they're about to pass through Esau's territory, God says basically, be very careful, don't provoke them.
Don't pick a fight.
Definitely not. Because, God says, I won't give you any of their land, not even enough space to put your foot on.
Not even a foot's worth. So why the strict hands-off policy there?
Well, the reason given is crystal clear. I have given Esau the hill country of Seir as his own possession. Simple as that. It's allocated, not for Israel.
So interaction is okay, but only on certain terms.
Purely commercial, really. Need food, need water, pay for it, pay in silver, no taking, just trading.
And right after that, there's this little reminder tucked in, isn't there, about their journey so far?
Oh, yeah, it's like a pause for reflection.
Yeah.
The text points out, that God's blessed them, watched over them through the whole 40 years in the desert. They haven't lacked anything.
So it puts the command about Esau in context. Like, I've provided for you, now follow these instructions carefully.
Exactly. It reinforces God's care before telling them how to carefully navigate this encounter with their relatives, Esau's descendants.
Okay. So they pass by Esau's people, following the rules, and head towards Moab. Do the instructions change then?
The outcome is similar. No war, no taking land. But the reason is tied to a different family line. As they approach the Moabites in Ar, the command is again very clearly, do not harass them or provoke them to war.
Don't bother the Moabites.
Right, because I will not give you any part of their land.
And the reason, parallel to Esau, but different ancestor.
Exactly. The Lord has given Ar to the descendants of Lot. So Seir is for Esau, Ar's for Lot's line. Both related to Israel, both territories designated by God, off limits for conquest.
Now, this is where it gets interesting with those, historical side notes. The text tells us who lived in Ar before the Moabites.
Yeah, these little historical snippets are fascinating. It says the Emites used to live there. And they sound pretty formidable.
How so?
Described as strong, numerous, and tall as the Anakites, who were kind of legendary giants.
Right, Danakites.
And both the Emites and Anakites were considered Rephates. That's the broader category. But the Moabites just called the ones in their area Emites.
Rephates. That name keeps popping up. And there's a similar note about Seir, about who was there before Esau.
There is. Before Esau's descendants, Seir was inhabited by the Horites. And the text says Esau's line drove them out, destroyed them, and settled there.
Okay, and here's the kicker. The text draws a direct comparison, doesn't it?
It does. It explicitly says Esau's descendants did this just as Israel did in the land the Lord gave them as their possession.
Wow. So Israel's future conquest isn't presented as totally unique then. It's part of a bigger picture.
That seems to be the implication. It frames it within this broader pattern of, well, divinely orchestrated displacement and settlement. God wasn't just moving Israel. He was allocating land and enabling other peoples, like Esau's descendants, to take possession of their designated territories too.
Interesting. Okay, so boundaries for Esau, boundaries for Moab. What about the next group, the Ammonites? Same drill.
Pretty much the same pattern, consistent message. When they get near the Ammonites, it's do not harass them or provoke them to war. Again, no conflict.
And the reason?
Same logic. For I will not give possession of any land belonging to the Ammonites. It's already been given by the Lord.
Let me guess, to the descendants of Lot.
You got it. Specifically, the Ammonite branch of Lot's descendants.
And following the pattern, the text mentions who was there before them, another group of Rephates.
Yes, exactly. This land, too, was considered a land of Rephates. The Ammonites had their own name for them, Zamzummites.
Zamzummites, okay.
Again, just described just like the Emites. Strong, numerous, and as tall as the Anakites. These Rephates were apparently quite widespread and known for their imposing presence.
So multiple groups, similar descriptions, different local names, and the Ammonites took over how?
Same mechanism described. The Lord destroyed the Zamzummites from before them, allowing the Ammonites to drive them out and settle down.
So the text really hammers home this pattern.
It does. It even adds more parallels right after. It repeats the Esauharite example in Seir and then throws in another one. The Avites near Gaza being kicked out by the Caphtorites who came from Caphtor, or Crete.
Okay, so this whole section is about respecting boundaries set by God for related peoples and understanding that God has been involved in settling other nations too, often by displacing previous inhabitants.
That's a good summary. Then there's a shift, a geographical marker,
Okay.
crossing the Zered Valley.
Right. And this crossing isn't just a location change, it's tied to a specific time frame. A long one.
A very significant one.
Huh.
38 years. The text explicitly links crossing the Zered Valley to the 38 years that passed since they left Kadesh Barnea.
Kadesh Barnea, where the previous generation refused to enter the land.
Precisely. And that's the reason given for this time span ending right here, at this crossing.
The lost generation.
That's it. The text says, by then that entire generation of fighting men had perished from the camp, as the Lord had sworn to them.
So the crossing marks the end of that judgment.
Yes. It says the Lord's hand was against them until they were completely wiped out. The last man from that generation dies, and then they cross the Zered. It's the end of an era of disobedience and its consequences. A new generation is now ready.
And with that judgment fulfilled, the instructions, they change again, don't they? And quite dramatically.
Oh, completely. It's a total pivot. They're told, okay, today you pass by Moab at Ar. Now, get moving. Cross the Arnon Gorge. They're moving past the do not touch territories.
And on the other side of the Arnon.
That's where things get, as you say, really interesting. The Lord doesn't just say pass through.
No, he points someone out.
He does. He says, see, I have given into your hand Sihon the Amorite, king of Heshbon and his country. And the command isn't be careful, it's
Begin to take possession of it and engage him in battle.
exactly a complete reversal from the approach with Esau, Moab, and Ammon. This land is for Israel, and conflict is mandated to claim it.
And there's a promise attached to this first battle.
A significant one. The Lord says, this very day I will begin to put the terror and fear of you on all the nations under heaven. Sihon is like the first domino. His defeat will send shockwaves.
They'll hear reports, tremble. Yeah. Okay, but even though God declares Sihon is theirs for the taking, the narrative says Israel sent messengers first, offering peace.
They did. From the desert of Kedemoth, messengers go to King Sihon. And the offer sounds familiar.
Like the one they made, or would have made, to Esau and Moab.
Just like it. Let us pass through your country. We'll stick to the main road. We'll pay for any food and water in silver. A standard, peaceful request for passage.
But Sihon says no.
Flat out refuses to let them pass.
And the text gives a reason for his refusal. It's not just Sihon being difficult.
No, and this is a really key theological point in the chapter. It says Sihon refused because the Lord your God had made his spirit stubborn and his heart obstinate.
God hardened his heart.
That's what the text says. And it gives the reason why, in order to give him into your hands as he has now done.
Wow. Okay, so God had already decided the outcome of Sihon's defeat before the peace offer was even made.
It seems so. The declaration, I have given him into your hand, comes before the messengers are sent. Sihon's hardened heart, his refusal, becomes the very mechanism that brings about the battle God intended.
So the peace offer was genuine from Israel's side, but ultimately the path was set by God.
That's how the text presents it. And after Sihon's refusal locks in the conflict, God basically says, okay, I told you so. I've started the process. Now go, conquer, take the land.
And the battle happens at Jahaz. What's the outcome?
Decisive. Sihon comes out with his whole army, but it doesn't go well for him. The text states plainly, the Lord our God delivered him over to us.
And Israel won.
They struck him down, Sihon, his sons, his entire army.
And the conquest of his towns, it sounds pretty total.
It does use strong language. At that time, we took all his towns and completely destroyed them, men, women, and children. We left no survivors within the towns. That phrase, completely destroyed, often relates to the idea of harem, dedicating something to God through destruction, specifically the inhabitants here.
But not everything was destroyed. There's a distinction made.
Right. It clarifies. But the livestock and the plunder from the towns, we carry off for ourselves. So the people within those towns were eliminated, but the material goods, the animals, were taken as spoils of war.
So a specific kind of destruction aimed at the population. And this first victory, how big was it?
It gave him a significant foothold. The text lists the territory. From Aror, on the edge of the Arnon Gorge, all the way to Gilead. And it adds, almost boasting, "Not one town was too strong for us. The Lord our God gave us all of them."
A total victory in that region. But even while conquering Sihon, did they stick to the earlier rules about Ammon?
They did. The chapter makes a point of saying that. The final verse emphasizes their obedience. But you did not encroach on any of the land of the Ammonites. They respected the boundaries God had set earlier, even in the midst of their first major conquest.
Okay, so let's try and wrap our heads around chapter 2. It's quite a journey. You start with these careful instructions about navigating around related peoples, Esau, Moab, Ammon. Their land is off limits, divinely assigned elsewhere.
Yeah, and mixed in with that, you get these fascinating glimpses of deeper history, the Rephates, the Horites, and this idea that God was orchestrating land settlement for multiple groups, not just Israel.
Then there's the crossing of the Zered Valley, marking the end of that 38-year judgment period for the generation that disobeyed at Kadesh Barnea.
A really significant turning point.
Right.
The past is dealt with, the slate is, in a way, wiped clean for the new generation.
And then, bam, the shift. They cross the Arnon, and the instruction flips entirely regarding Sihon the Amorite. No more hands off. Now it's take the land, engage in battle.
And that first victory is explicitly framed as the start of God establishing Israel's fearsome reputation among the nations.
What really stands out is, like you said, how specific and tailored the instructions are for each group. It's not one size fits all. It depends on lineage, on God's prior decrees about land allocation.
And ultimately on God's specific plan for that moment, like with Sihon.
Which brings us to that really provocative point about Sihon. Israel offers peace terms, seemingly an act of diplomacy, a choice. But the text immediately pulls back the curtain and says, well, actually, the Lord hardened Sihon's heart so that Israel would conquer him. It was part of the plan to hand him over.
Yeah.
It puts divine sovereignty and, well, human action right next to each other in a really stark way. So thinking about just this one example from the text, what does it make you consider about how those two things, God's overarching plan and individual choices or refusals, like Sihon's, might interact according to this narrative?